So, Twilight. Twilight, a cultural phenomena turned early internet meme, a touchstone for the so bad it's good genre, and a blatant piece of propaganda. No, but seriously, I wanted to talk about Twilight badly. If you haven't watched anything about Twilight, you've probably been living under a rock. And I would be amazed. It's everywhere. It's always been everywhere. Everybody knows everything about Twilight. And, I was starting to get FOMO. So I watched it. I want to start this off by saying I have not read all of the Twilight books. I've watched all the movies, I've read a lot of fan fiction, and I've read excerpts from the books. But I think I would be remiss to say that I have read every single Twilight book, because 3,000 pages of Stephenie Meyer's writing is in my bucket list for not doing, whatever that's called, my don't do that list. But I had some thoughts and some things I wanted to say about it that I don't think have been talked about in depth before. So here we are. So I decided completely soundly that the very first video I wanted to make on this YouTube channel was going to be about feminism. Twilight's everywhere. There's the sparkling vampire memes. There's all of the awful writing. All of the actors in it are now A-list celebrities. And I went into it with the question, why do so many people like Twilight if it's such a bad thing? There's got to be a reason. And I came out of it really confused. It was a very different experience than I was expecting. So we're going to get into that today. Twilight was published in 2005, and from then on has been like the 14-year-old I'm not like other girls fantasy. It's the thing to watch, and that's something we're going to talk about a lot. But it grossed nearly $3.4 billion in the box office, all of the movies, of course. But $3.4 billion is a lot of money. Everybody knew about it. Everybody had an opinion on it, including, but not limited to, the current president of the United States tweeted multiple times about the actors in it, which I think is just, it's not impressive, but it's a phenomenally strange timeline that we're living in, isn't it? This stuff had teenage girls at Comic-Con screaming their heads off. And that's the first point, is this is very obviously aimed at teenage girls. 12 to 16 years old, that's who was reading this stuff. These girls were obsessed with the idea of this story that Stephenie Meyer created, as well as the culture around it, and being a part of it, I think, is a huge part of it. Twilight, the movies, were essentially an overnight sensation, and it turned C and D-list celebrities into, like, A-list celebrities immediately. This was a huge thing for the time, which many people watching this video might know, but apparently I'm a child. I was 7 or 8 at the time they were releasing, and I don't remember it very well. So I did a lot of online research on Reddit to see people talking about kind of this time period, and apparently it was a huge deal. There's levels to this. Twilight was a huge sensation, the more I read about it. And, you know, with that great love comes great hatred. And Twilight received a lot of hate, as many people know. And I feel like that hate was aimed at the teenage girls that consumed it, which is part of my problem. And part of the reason I'm creating this video is it's really interesting how people make fun of the product, but there's also kind of this huge movement making fun of Twilight fans, being like, oh, you like that? And it's like, you're talking to a 12-year-old girl. That's a 12-year-old girl that likes Twilight. I mean, why do you even care what a 12-year-old girl likes? The internet and society as a whole just apparently cannot let teenage girls like something. It's really awful, but it's also just like, okay. So I went to school for writing, and the only thing I got out of that is being able to talk about writing with some semblance of, like, authority, even though I still probably know nothing. Listen, Stephenie Meyer, I'm going to give her this. She wrote a best-selling novel. I have not done that, okay? So everything I'm about to say, take with a grain of salt, because how am I supposed to know? I'll be the first to say that Twilight has bad writing.
When I read it, it seemed like it was like it was a book that wasn't supposed to be published.
The movies, number one, are not good adaptations of the book, even though a lot of the themes and the problems I'm going to talk about are present in both. I see a lot of Twilight fans being like, oh, the movies are just not good adaptations of the book. And that's fine, okay? Stephanie Meyer, she's probably onto something. She sold millions of these books, okay? But there are some deep story level issues with Twilight. Meyer herself admits that she had never written before Twilight. The idea for Twilight came to her in a dream one night, and it was of her sitting in a field with a sparkly vampire, which, if you've seen the movies, you know what that scene is, and those scenes are. And it came to her in a dream, and from there she went on a 3-month writing spree, and then apparently got it published. So a lot of these problems probably could have been solved with a good editor, a little practice, maybe going through a few drafts. I don't think that happened the way it typically does. So first problem is Bella. Bella's a nothing burger. Bella has such a lack of anything interesting about her. The one thing I can say that Bella has is that she reads books. She reads Pride and Prejudice and Romeo and Juliet. Other than that, there's not much going on. And part of that is because Stephanie Meyer isn't a writer. So she didn't give Bella anything specific. And this is something I want to nitpick. A lot of the time when people are starting out writing, if they want someone to relate to the character, they don't give the character specific things. They make this character super general so as not to offend any sensibilities or anything. And that doesn't really work very well in writing. Listen, we understand that humans are flawed humans, right? And we want to be able to see that three-dimensionality of the character and everything about a character. So you want to give your character some very specific things that some people are going to relate to, some people are going to be like, oh, okay, whatever. But Bella's so flat. Bella has nothing going on. And one of the only things she does have going on, segue, is all of her interiority, all of her thoughts revolve around Edward. And it's amazing how they translated that from the book to the movie. Because at least in the first movie, I can't tell you when Bella thinks about something other than Edward. I can't tell you when Bella worries about things other than Edward. I mean, Kristen Stewart, love her. She rubbed vegetables against her face, but she didn't even, when you're working with a bad script, you can't give much more than is there. So, you know, all the power to her. She made it interesting to watch, but there's not that much depth to the character. And my argument is, I think that's a feature, not a flaw, of Twilight. I think Stephanie Meyer intentionally created a character that was wrapped up in this man and existed for this man. And I think she wanted that. I think that was her fantasy. So that lack of interiority and that lack of any texture to Bella's character, I think was on purpose, because she wanted 14-year-old girls to be able to read it and be like, that's me. That's me. Oh, I wish I had a man that controlled me. And we'll get into that more later. But that's where a lot of the, funny parts of the story go. A lot of underlying humor of this story that are unintentional, 100%. But the underlying humor of Twilight really lies in the fact that I don't know what decision Bella would make. Compared to Hunger Games, I could tell you what Katniss does, right? I could tell you what Katniss is going to do in a situation. Even look at the fandom. You see these TikTok videos, or they're posting on websites being like, oh, what do you think Katniss would do if this thing happened or this thing happened? And I don't think that happens with Twilight nearly as much, because I don't know. What would Bella do? Bella doesn't seem to act based on any humanness. She just kind of does things and reacts based on Edward. And a lot of the melodrama of the story shields itself from people taking a critical eye and being like, what is this ideology and why are we feeding this to people? Right? Like, it's funny to laugh at. It is objectively funny. I'm not going to argue that. But because it's funny, people don't take it serious enough to critically dissect the ideology and the thought process behind it. That ideology I'm talking about, it's Mormonism. Or at least it's partially Mormonism, and it's partially just general social conservatism. Stephenie Meyer is a Mormon, and has been a Mormon, and from the looks of it, will be a Mormon. That's where she's coming at from this. And not only is she a Mormon, but she's a Mormon that grew up in, late 90s, early 2000s. And that, there is something to be said for that as well. The period in which Twilight became mainstream was complicated, to say the least. Movies were beginning to become franchises, right at the same time that there was an economic collapse going on while Twilight was kind of rising up. There was the dawn of the smartphone that was only a few years after 9/11. There was a bunch of weird stuff happening. So Stephenie Meyer is a Mormon, and her story that she writes is a direct allegory for abstinence. Well, more on that later. But she says this. She says it's a direct allegory on abstinence, and that's what Twilight's about. I want to dissect kind of how she views her characters for a second here. Starting with Edward, because he has more going on in a lot of ways. Edward is possessive, he's controlling, and he views ownership as devotion.
I bet he's smart. Is he smart? Mama, can I talk to you later?
I like watching you sleep. It's kind of fascinating to me.
And he's Stephenie's view of a good conservative boyfriend. Edward's the right choice in all of this, which I could go on and on for hours about how he's objectively the wrong choice. Jacob is better, but whatever. If you haven't seen Twilight, this story really is, you're a 17-year-old girl. Do you choose a twink who wants to kill you or a guy with a deer in it? That's the whole thing. I mean, there's other parts going on, but that's the core philosophical question. Okay? I think Stephenie Meyer's argument is that you should choose the twink who wants to kill you. And that's really concerning to me, because there are very few good things about Edward. I mean, like I said, he's possessive. He's constantly worried about Bella being his, which is really weird to me, because he's a vampire, and he's immortal, and really strong, and really fast, and has impenetrable skin. So why are you threatened by another man? Oh, and he's hot. Or I don't know. He wasn't hot. I don't think he was hot in the movie. But he's supposed to be hot. Really hot. So that's the weird thing to me is why are you so concerned with other men? Even if Bella is going, kind of flirting with the dog boy, what are you concerned about? You're the best. You can't die, dude. That's crazy. So, I don't know. That's a little weird to me. He's possessive. Second, he's controlling. He tells her what to do constantly throughout the story. Third, he watches her throughout the night without her consent, consistently. And then, this whole thing about, devotion with him, and oh, I just want to watch you to make sure you're safe. He uses the excuse to watch her throughout the night, and says oh, I want to make sure you're safe. You're so peaceful when you're resting. I can't sleep. Ugh. He does all of that, and then very next movie, he goes away and does not care at all whether she's safe. That's the point of the next movie. So it's I don't believe that he actually wanted to keep her safe. That aside, he literally wants to kill her. That's said several times. If you read Midnight Sun, It describes how badly he wants to kill her and drain her blood and suck her blood. That's crazy. Third, he frames ownership as devotion. He constantly says, Bella, you're mine. It's really weird. The fantasy is that there's this young teenage girl who gets chosen by a 118-year-old powerful man who wants to kill her but chooses not to. That's the bar we're setting. Next, moving on to Bella. Bella's a really weird character in what little we have. Bella's this character where it's framed that passivity is a virtue. It tries to tell the audience that self-erasure is romance. And she is the vessel who gets chosen. And that's where I think the hook, line, and sinker for the teenage girls is. Because imagine it. It's pretty much the most awful time of most people's lives. And you get this fantasy story about getting chosen by a rich, powerful guy. I understand it. I get it. You want to be chosen by someone. You want someone to say you're good enough, right? But the framework through which this happens is really weird. And that's my issue. Bella constantly is this passive character. In fact, very, very little do we actually see her making decisions and doing things in her own life. Maybe you see it after she becomes a vampire, but not really before that. And then she completely self-erases. Her whole life becomes about Edward. Edward this, Edward that, Edward wants this, Edward wants that. And that's the fantasy that's being written. And that's really weird to me. Because that's not, I don't know, maybe this is a man's perspective, but that's not appealing to me. So kind of going back to the abstinence allegory and when Stephenie Meyer was writing all of this, back in 2005 when Twilight was first published, this was the peak of federally funded abstinence-only programs in the USA. So this was the Bush administration dumping hundreds of millions of dollars into education, teaching young people about abstinence, and abstinence is good, about damaged goods and people being damaged goods if they're non-virgins. This is a widespread thing, and this is in schools, this is at home programs, this is after school programs, this is at church, if you're going to church at the time. True love waits and purity culture weren't like fringe things in society. This was the norm. You had like Britney Spears and Hannah Montana flashing their purity, which is a conversation for another day, but that alone is a little bit strange to have young women actively talking about their virginity on national syndicated television. This is a thing. At the time, Seventh Heaven was breaking records, and if you don't know what Seventh Heaven is, it's about some Protestant minister and his family, and a huge point of the show is about like pure living and not, having sex before marriage and things like that. And this is where Stephenie Meyer was coming from. Stephenie Meyer didn't sit down and write an abstinence pamphlet. She wrote her fantasy. And that's where I hesitate to say it's propaganda, because I do think propaganda has to be intentional. And I think Stephenie Meyer was a person that was inundated with all of these thoughts about what being pure was, what living holy was, what doing the right thing in a relationship was, and doing the right thing as a woman was. And she was so inundated with these thoughts that she wrote this story about it. And that story just happened to be something that reads like propaganda. Her fantasy was shaped by a cultural and religious movement that viewed female desire as something dangerous, female sexuality as something that needed to be controlled, and waiting as the ultimate sign of virtue. The ideology didn't have to be stated to be like very present in these stories. A huge point of Breaking Dawn is like an abortion argument played out in Twilight world. A lot of these ideas are just treated as if they're natural. It was the assumption that was baked into the air. A lot of this conversation. After 9/11, there was this broad swing toward conservative values and traditional gender roles, and even religious frameworks and movements. The mid-2000s were unusually receptive to a story where a girl's highest achievement is being chosen by a dangerous and powerful man who controls himself around her. That was the peak that we're looking at. That was the fantasy. And I think even in the way that the story is told, these assumptions are present. I mean, look at Bella's actions and Edward's actions and how they're framed. Bella has to wait, and Edward has to restrain himself. Okay, Bella's sat waiting till the right time to become a vampire, and Bella has to restrain himself from killing her. And he has the hard job. It's framed as it's really hard for him to not kill her and not harm her. And that's really reminiscent of the sentiment of, well, ladies, let's not wear spaghetti straps on today's trip because we don't want to make things harder for our brother in Christ, right? And almost the idea of, like, women, you shouldn't have that desire until you're married. Once you're married, you can have that desire, but you shouldn't even have that. And that plays across in the writing. There were multiple times where Edward is, like, almost disgusted with Bella for wanting to be a vampire. He's like, no, what? You can't be a vampire, what? And it's like, dude, what are we doing? And I think Twilight didn't become a phenomenon despite this ideology. I think it became a phenomenon because of it. And that's what I want to look at, is all of these factors, the targeting young women, and then spreading this idea about the world and the way the world works. This was natural to Stephenie Meyer. I don't think this was necessarily intended to be the next big thing, backed by executives. I think it became that because this is what everyone was living in. It's really like a cultural artifact, is what we're looking at with Twilight and with the movies and the books. See, this machine was already built. Stephenie Meyer didn't build this crazy propaganda story. This machine was already built. Meyer just fed it more and made it this big, explosive cultural thing. I'm going to give a little history lesson. I'm going to preach here for a minute. Vampires are used historically as an allegory for a lot of things, including, but not limited to, unbridled sexuality and desire, exploitation in the ruling class, and sexual assault. If you look at these Abrahamic religions, vampires really are the antithesis of the messianic figure, right? A vampire takes someone else's blood to give itself eternal life. What did the messianic figure do? It gives its blood to give others eternal life. Bram Stoker's Dracula explores themes of coercion and consent, bodily violation, and cycles of abuse. That's the earliest vampire story, right? But we have folklore and other stories beyond that. Even further back, I made this relation, I was just thinking about it, Ovid. Ovid was a poet, Roman poet, and he wrote stories, his most famous being Ovid's Metamorphosis, which is this several parts to it about a lot of those Greek stories that you've heard about, Orpheus and Eurydice, a bunch of things like that. And a common theme in Ovid's stories is metamorphosis, of course, and the changing of things, right? So one of those being the change of love and desire to violence, and desire and violence, and that desire for power, and that transfer of power. He writes around these ideas a lot, which I would recommend going and reading it and kind of gathering those things for yourself. But he writes a lot about kind of the transfer of power and having power over other people and what that means. And one of my favorite stories is the story of Echo and Narcissus. And in the story, there's different translations, and the ways they're told differ a lot. Narcissus is a very proud boy. He's 15 or 16, depending on the translations you look at. And he's a very proud boy, but he constantly has women coming up to him because he's beautiful, and that's why he's proud. And in this story, Echo falls in love with Narcissus and constantly goes after him. Now, the thing with Echo is Echo echoes the last thing that she's heard, and a lot of the times in this story, the interesting thing about it is that when she echoes it, she echoes almost the part of it that she wants to hear, right? And it depends how you read into this, but a lot of the people read it, and myself included, as Echo assaults Narcissus. And Narcissus's last words, as this is happening, is, "I'd rather die before you have power of me." This idea that his sexuality is a power. And she yells back, "Have power of me," which is what she wants to hear, that invitation almost, because she loves him. And it's this story of skewed love and love that is twisted and changed. And I looked into it more, and there are stories of vampires in Greek and Roman literature. And not only that, Ovid wrote about them. They're not called vampires, of course. They're called Strix or Strigs. In this, they are witches who can transform into, this is a quote, "a night bird that cries by night without food or drink, with head below and tips of feet above, a harbinger of war and civil strife to men." And these witches prey on men and take their lifeblood. So this conversation about vampires and where they get their power and them unconsensually taking power from people for themselves is a historical thing. It's something that we know historically that has been the point of these stories being told. And that's not to say that Twilight doesn't acknowledge this in some way. There's this whole subplot about Edward being really heavy laden and burdened with the fact that he doesn't know if he has a soul and he doesn't know if he's eternally damned and how he's done these bad things. But what he is and what he represents is still this creature that assaults people, takes people's power without their consent. And we see that happening in Twilight. I would argue that Bella has lost her soul before she becomes a vampire. I mean, she lives only for Edward. She's completely self-erased. She's totally passive in this whole story. And he does that to her. And he doesn't necessarily do that by just turning her into a vampire, as in other vampire stories, but he does that through other means. And honestly, if you're taking it from that context, it's a well-told story. If you take it as Bella was meant to not have character, Bella was meant to be this, and Stephenie Meyer intended us to read into it this way, it's actually a really interesting story to dissect. But Stephenie Meyer didn't intend for it to be read that way. She intended for it to be pulp romance. So, I want to go back to the girls who liked Twilight. What were they actually hungry for? I think they were hungry for being chosen. They were hungry for being special. And these were girls that were totally inundated with this idea that desire was something dangerous. And they had to wait for something. So this story really spoke to them. This is what they were around, and they just wanted a story where they could feel chosen. And they could feel different and special. And where someone who is a lot better than me could really choose me. They, viewing these vampires as this good thing. This, someone really cool could choose me. And I want to say that hunger was real and legitimate. Of course they want to feel special and chosen. They're human. That's what everyone wants. But we put the joke on them, and we were like, "Oh, haha, LOL, this is really funny that they like this slop." And we didn't actually look at the product they were handed. The product they were handed really is the base problem. The lasting joke around Twilight really is aimed at the girls and the people in general that liked it, never at the ideology. I mean, we dunked on teenagers for having a fantasy instead of dissecting who built that fantasy and why did they build that fantasy. See, Twilight was an accidental document. It told the truth about what America wanted for its young women, and instead of dissecting that, we dissected the girls, and we made fun of the girls, and we made fun of them for enjoying this, and we viewed them as the problem, instead of looking at the actual problem, which is what they were being given to consume. I mean, these are a bunch of adults and Hollywood executives who should know better and should think through this better. And they made this and they went, yeah, the girls will really love this. This is great. And my thing is, there's 100 ways to tell this story inside of that ideological framework without making it something where women are made lesser and men are kind of propped up, even though these men in the story actively want to kill her. Like, the character you're supposed to empathize with is being preyed upon by people. You don't need to do that to tell the story you want to tell. There are great ways to tell this story without, at every turn, erasing Bella as a character and propping up this idea that this dangerous and powerful man is good because he controls himself. That doesn't mean good. Why are you even having the desires to suck her blood, which we talked about earlier is already an allegory for other darker things? So this is where I really want to reframe the cringe. What does it say about us as a society that we all collectively looked past who was feeding us and what they were feeding us, and we just pointed to the victims of this propaganda, and we were like, ha, you're a nerd. I mean, I heard that a lot when I was younger. Oh, you like that book? You must be stupid. Why did we do that? Why didn't we actually question what Twilight was and go, wow, this is a really deeply flawed book? I'm not here to sit here and say, wow, I'm saying anything interesting and new. Yeah, there's probably hundreds of videos online talking about how Twilight is bad. But I feel like so many of those videos go into it with the framework of it is bad and it's funny that people like it. It's weird that people like it. It's not weird. It makes so much sense for a teenage girl to like this. It makes so much sense for someone with an undeveloped mind to read this and go, yeah, this is my jam, right? It's not a weird thing at all. With that being said, I just want to leave off with the question, what does it say that these girls and their desires got dismissed? And what does it say that this is what got sold to those girls? Because I think the answer we find is that Twilight was a broader thing. Twilight wasn't just a book or a movie. Twilight had an ideological framework around it that existed throughout America. And it existed through consistent misogyny throughout the process. Even to the point of the quality of story that we give young girls. Like I said earlier, Twilight isn't even good writing. It's not good.
You nicknamed my daughter after the Loch Ness Monster?
And that's what we give to young women to consume, even now, is bad writing that shares a lot of weird ideas about what a woman should be. And I think that's what I want to question. There's this idea of the prejudice of low expectations. My answer to that question, my answer to what does it mean that this is what got dismissed and this is what got sold, is that ideological framework, this misogyny, goes deeper than just the story being written and made. We didn't care about the content of what we were giving young women. And then we made fun of those young women for consuming the content we made young women to consume. I just want to say, Hollywood should do better. I think we can make great stories for young women that they'll really enjoy and will give them a positive view of themselves and their place in the world. And wasn't this just such a fun time, guys? I hope everyone has a great day. If you've watched this far into the video, I'm amazed. Thank you so much. Or you're my friend, and I love you. Love you, Michael. I'm going to send this to you. Goodbye. I'll see you in the next video.